Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is I'm going to do a Q&A style episode today. I have a Q that I want to go over here. But first, before I do that, if you are interested in learning more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, the 10 things you need for a body recomp, the two different types of body recomp, why it's important to focus on body comp over just weight, then my free checklist is for you. So go and check that out. And that will give you a good base for a lot of the things that I discuss here in the podcast. With that out of the way, let's dive into today's questions. So I have 4 questions, all good ones. I'm really looking forward to diving into this. Some around body comp change, fat loss, barbell, dumbbell RDL, and some lifting related stuff or personal related lifting stuff as well too. All right. So first question I have is, if someone has significant fat to lose, do you still think 6 months is like the max that somebody should be in a fat loss phase? Or is that different for that type of situation? I probably have 20 more pounds to lose, but July will be 6 months in a deficit. I've already lost 20 pounds. So yeah, I definitely think when we are on our way down, we're at higher body fat levels and you're trying to get down to a body fat level you feel best at, you may be in a deficit a bit longer. I'm going to go over some specifics of what may prolong that process or shorten it. But in saying that, I still, so, someone that is at higher body fat levels, you're trying to get down to leaner levels, you're probably going to spend more time in a deficit initially than, say, someone who's a bit leaner. That makes sense. However, I still would be careful with extended deficits and spending extended periods of time in a deficit. Now, we'll talk about what that may look like, how we can potentially structure that to make that process longer. The more weight that you need to lose, there's a high chance that you're going to have to do this in phases versus just doing it all in one swoop. But again, there's some things that we can do within that time frame that can prolong the process to where you don't necessarily have to take a 2-week, 4-week, 8-week, 12-week, or longer diet break in that process. But again, a lot of this is going to be driven by the person, their biofeedback, training performance, how they're feeling. If you want to do a look at blood work as well too, like all these things are going to drive that process of what that may look like specifically. So I think the first way to go about this is I want to start with, okay, so how long should these fat loss phases be? What's going to impact it? And then I want to know, okay, so how to know when to take a break? What are some things that are popping up, right? But when we look at how long fat loss phases are going to be, I would say on average, if I were to sit here and think about all the clients I've worked with, my experience, what's going to be that time frame that somebody can stick with the deficit consistently? And it's usually going to be around 8 to 16 weeks. Okay. That's enough to where you're going to get someone to commit to it. It sucks, but you can push through. And then, anything longer than that. And we're looking at you're going to run into motivation issues, things just get in the way. Right now, again, what I'm going to talk about here are some things that can prolong that process to make it longer than that. But I would just say on average, most people are going to start to fizzle out and be like, this sucks, I don't want to do this at that 8 to 16 week mark for 2 things, right? You actually stick with your calorie deficit for that amount of time. And, again, this freaking sucks. I want to get out of it. And this is, again, we're talking, hey, you're just going straight through. You're just dieting the entire time. No breaks, no refeed days, etc. I think that 8 to 16 week mark, people start to, even if they're doing well, they start to notice that their body pushes back a little bit. It's a bit harder. They don't want to do it anymore. And then on the flip side, if someone's not really dropping any weight, not really dropping any body fat during that 8 to 16 week mark, and then it's just from a motivation standpoint, people lose motivation and they're like, why am I even doing this? And then that's another whole animal that we need to deal with. So I think typically it's going to be 8 to 16 weeks is that sweet spot. But in saying that, I've had clients that have gone way longer than that. I have clients, I don't want to say shorter than that because I don't think that would be great. You're not going to get much done, but you could go shorter than that. But again, I've definitely had clients that have gone longer than that. But to really push it out longer than, say, 16 weeks, it's typically going to require some sort of break in between. So I think the first thing we're going to look at, so what's going to determine how long you can be in a fat loss phase? So one's going to be your rate of loss. Okay. So when we look at your average scale weight per week, where's that trending at over time? What is that rate of loss? Are you losing when we average it out, you're losing about 0.5% of body weight per week. You're going to be able to prolong that process, or maybe you're going even a little bit slower than that. Again, we run into the potential motivation issues of it being slower than that. But if we're seeing that trend down over time, like we can prolong that deficit. That's probably telling me that if your deficit is that amount, there's either 2 things going on. One, it is such a small deficit that like you can still have some flexibility. It's going to be good from a body comp perspective. Training performance is still going well. And I don't think biofeedback is necessarily going to take a big hit there with that. On the other scenario is when it's going that slow is there's probably some sort of flexibility built into your week where you have maybe a day or two where you're eating at maintenance, or maybe you have a week where you're closer to maintenance for the entire week, whether it's planned or not planned, right? So because of that, we're getting this kind of built-in break within it so you can prolong that process. Whereas if you're losing, say, 1% of body weight per week, that's going to shorten that time frame that we can lose, that we can be in a deficit. Again, you can go longer, but obviously the leaner you get, the quicker the weight loss. Now we're going to run into this metabolic adaptation, right? You're going to have more adaptation sooner. You're going to feel worse. You're going to just have that internal drive to want to overconsume calories and to move less. So then the deficit becomes harder and harder. You risk from a lean body mass perspective not being in a great spot to maintain that. And again, you just naturally are going to have this drive to where like after 8 to 16 weeks of that, like you're going to not want to do it anymore. Everything's going to push you in the opposite direction. And that's, again, if somebody's going straight through. Now, again, if you're at 1% of body weight loss per week, and then now maybe we throw in some refeed days and some days closer to maintenance, maybe a 1 to 2 week diet break, maybe that will give you that break to where now you can extend out that fat loss phase. At that point, you can push a deficit a bit longer. I have a client now where she's been in fat loss diet for almost 30 weeks now, but she's had a couple week-long diet breaks. She's had built-in refeed days each and every week. Her deficit hasn't been super massive. She's been pushing training still. Training's going well. We've been able to go a bit longer, but it is one of those things where you can't really cheat the system. You can't go super fast for super long periods of time and get super lean at the same time, right? There's always going to be that give and take. You can have different routes to get there, but at some point you're going to have to pay the price of that. What that looks like for each one really depends on the methods in terms of how you get there. So again, if you want to have a short, quick fat loss diet, you can do that, but that's also going to require some skill to be able to do that for, say, 6 to 8 weeks. So you could definitely do it. But then we also run into the issue of, if you're at higher body fat levels, is 6 to 8 weeks going to be enough to get off the body fat that you want to get? Maybe it is. And maybe you do 6 to 8 weeks and then you take a 2-month diet break and then you're like, all right, I'm ready to go. I want to do another 6 to 8 week push. Again, we can do that as long as these other things are in check too, right? Your biofeedback, you're feeling good. So again, there's a lot of different ways that we can go, but one of the main things we're going to look at that's going to determine how long is going to be your rate of loss, because that's going to determine the calorie deficit you're in, right? The quicker the weight loss, the larger the calorie deficit is. The larger the calorie deficit is, that's when you can run into some issues if you do that for extended periods of time. And then we have body fat levels. This is huge as well too. So I've already hinted at that and talked about this, but body fat levels is also going to be something that could potentially increase or decrease the amount of time that you're going to be in a fat loss diet. So in 2 ways, right? Because like I said, the higher your body fat levels are, that's going to give you more runway to be a bit more aggressive and to have a longer diet than someone who is a lot leaner, right? Because someone who's a lot leaner, you're going to have to be probably not as aggressive, at least again, at the leaner you get. And because of that, you may have to shorten that time frame. You're probably not going to want to be in a deficit for a year if that's the case. Whereas someone who is at super high body fat levels, they're going at a moderate rate of loss per week. Like they could really extend their diet for a long period of time. And then on top of it, if you throw in a week or two here and there where you're at maintenance, you throw in a couple of refeed days for this person where they're eating at maintenance, like that can really prolong that process. And now we say 8 to 16 weeks, but now it could be up to a whole year for a person, especially if, again, we look at what is their biofeedback? Are they feeling good? What does that look like? Is training performance going well? So body fat levels are important. Now, in saying that, on the flip side, though, higher body fat levels will give you a bit more runway to have a larger deficit to diet for longer, but it also, the larger your body fat or the higher your body fat levels are, the more body fat you have to lose. And as I said initially here, at some point, there's going to be that you're probably going to need to take a diet break and lose that in multiple phases anyways. So it's like you have a larger runway, but because you have a larger runway, you have more body fat to lose. It's going to take longer. And eventually, I think the more that you lose, you're going to start to run into some issues. But that may not be the case for everyone because, again, it's going to come back to your rate of loss as well, too. Also, we're going to look at your recent dieting history. Have you already lost a good amount of weight? That's going to determine your fat loss phase. If you're someone who, again, you're at higher body fat levels, we're going to go at a moderate rate and you haven't lost any weight recently, we have a large runway here. But on the flip side, if you already have lost, say, 20% of your body weight, right, and you lost it pretty quickly, and now your moderate body fat levels, that's going to change how long we can diet for, and if we're even going to diet anyways. So your recent dieting history is going to be something I want to dive into there. And then the final thing here is going to be your biofeedback. Like, how do you feel in that process? Okay. Because this ultimately is the biggest driver. In saying that, anytime you lose body fat, this is a process that your body is going to fight back on. And because of that, it's not going to be an easy process. Like there's going to be some pushback, which means there's going to be some uncomfortableness and you're going to have to go out of your way to make choices. So from that standpoint, there's going to be some hunger. You might be a little bit lower energy. You're going to want to eat more food. You're going to want that. You're going to want to make that the tastier food choice than the other food choice. But in saying that, we also shouldn't feel like complete garbage in this process. If we are super low energy, we're just ravenously hungry, training is terrible, you just feel awful, you're super moody. From female perspective, you lost your menstrual cycle, or that's super irregular now. It's like these are signs that our body is not in a good spot to drop body fat, change. And so we need to work on that first and see what's going on. So at the end of the day, your body fat levels are super important, rate of loss is super important, but how you feel and your biofeedback is ultimately going to be the driver of what direction we go and how we're going to make adjustments there. Let's say we take the second part of this is how to know when to take a break, because I think that's going to be, for some people, it's tough. It's, I'm just hungry because I didn't eat a lot the day before. Maybe I didn't make the greatest food choices. I'm stressed, whatever it is. Is that a sign that I need to take a diet break, or do I just need to give it a couple days? I think if it's been a couple weeks and that keeps happening, definitely a sign that we might need to take some sort of break, add in a refeed day, diet break, whatever it may be. That's some things to look at if you need to take a break. If you're at 10 to 20% body fat, or you've lost 10 to 20% of your body fat levels, and this is starting to happen more often than not, you're getting super hungry, energy levels aren't great, you're just feeling super low motivation. To me, that's a sign that we need to take a break there, right? So again, we're looking at those diet fatigue things. We're looking at motivation. If you've lost, say, 5% of your body weight and you're running into these issues, diet fatigue, motivation, et cetera, it could be a protocol thing. Maybe you need to change your kind of methods at which we're losing body fat. Maybe it's being a little bit less aggressive. Maybe it's, hey, you need to focus on sleep. Maybe we need to look at your training output. What does that look like? Those would be some things. Is it meal timing thing? These would be things we would potentially that we would look at and be like, okay, maybe we need to focus on that over just taking a break. So it could be a method thing there. And then even motivation too, right? If you're just at the point where I really don't want to do this, right now, then again, a sign that we need to take a break there, because you have to, in order to lose body fat, you have to want to do it and you have to want to put in the work day in and day out. And if you don't, we need to look into that of, okay, is this the right thing for you? Here's what it's going to take. If you don't want to do it right now, you don't have to do it right now. Here's the trade-offs of not doing it right now. But at the end of the day, if that motivation's not there, we definitely need to look into that, right? Because I've had a lot of people that think they want to come in, they want to lose body fat, they want to lose weight, but then their choices that they make are not lining up with that. So it's, hey, we have to have this honest conversation of, you say you want this, but you're not doing the things that you need to do that. Is this the right thing for you right now? Even though that you probably need to drop some weight, you need to lose some body fat. We may need to focus on habits over that for right now to get you in a better spot there. So those are all things. So I think at the end of the day, when you are a bit higher in body fat, it is fine to be in a deficit a bit initially, to be in a deficit a bit longer initially. I do want to get the point for clients to where we're spending no more than 2 to 3 months out of the year in a fat loss diet, maybe even expand that out to every 18 months. We're not spending more than 2 to 3 months. Again, it depends on the person, blood work, biofeedback, all that in terms of that specifically. But again, the higher your body fat levels are, you're probably going to spend more time in a deficit over the first year or two to get down to those body fat levels that you feel best at. Blood markers are in their best spot, and biofeedback's in a good spot. All right, so hopefully that answered that question there and gives you some more insight into that. Now, here's one that's somewhat similar: is how aggressive should fat loss be for women? So somebody reached out, what do you feel is an aggressive and sustainable deficit for a woman? Her idea is way too aggressive. He's talking about his wife, but let's say her maintenance is 2,200. I was thinking 30%. I was thinking 30% to be around 1.5K calories and shooting for 1 gram per pound of body weight. Quick thoughts on that. So I think when we look at pure numbers here, if you take somebody's maintenance, I think 500 calories is a sweet spot. Okay. When we're looking at pure numbers of calories. So if you know your exact maintenance, I think if you take all 500 calories off of that, that's going to be a pretty good, aggressive, sustainable fat loss, right? Because aggressive could be, hey, you could go way higher than that, and that would be more aggressive. But for also looking at the sustainability piece of things, to me, about 500 calories deficit would be what we'd go at. But in saying this, the more I learn and the more I work with people, I honestly just do not care about calorie numbers. I just think there's too much noise that goes into it. I know some people won't necessarily agree with me on that, but the longer I've worked with people, it's just, man, there's just so much noise in these numbers in terms of tracking inaccuracies, what's actually in it. You go out to eat. So it's, even if I say, hey, cut off 500 calories, it's, if somebody can't, just the accuracy of it is, there's just too much noise in it, all those reasons. And we know that people underestimate caloric intake. It's even worse when they're fat loss dieting. Women tend to be a bit worse than that than men in terms of underreporting calories, again, in the research there. So again, things that we just need to pay attention to and why I'm just not a huge fan of just looking at pure numbers. And instead, I'm going to go off of, okay, what's your food log look like? And then some of these other things that I'm looking at here. So what I like to look at instead is what is their rate of loss? Okay, because that ultimately is going to be what their actual deficit is, right? Because again, somebody could be logging, hey, I'm in a 500 calorie deficit. My tracker says that I'm logging this and they're not dropping body weight. When he said this, that his wife, she tends to go off plan and not follow it. This is where, again, I'm not worried about exact numbers, because if we give her this number and then she doesn't follow it anyways, it doesn't freaking matter what the aggressive fat loss diet is there. So I like to go off of what is their rate of loss per week, because again, that's actually going to tell you what's going on. Because also another thing that can make this confusing is, say you put them in a 500 calorie deficit, everyone's bodies respond differently to different energy deficits. So when someone's in a deficit, they may compensate a bit more. They may have a little bit more adaptation to that deficit. What you think is 500 calorie deficit is only 350. Whereas for the same person, it could be could actually be a 500 calorie deficit. Again, it's too hard to actually measure it. Things change from day to day. That again, that's just a lot of noise to me. That's why, again, I like to go off of what are the actual results that are going on? Where's their body weight trending over time? What is that average rate of loss there? That's why I like to track that, because that's going to give us the data that we actually need to make adjustments. Like, hey, you are actually in a deficit, even though if you're eating whatever amount of calories, like you're in a deficit. And again, that also accounts for life. It's not feasible to ask people to track every last calorie all the time if they want to have some sort of social life on top of it. It's going to have that built into it. Now, it is a little bit more reactive. And so there's some lagging feedback on that, again, if you could be 2 to 3 weeks down the line, and it's like, now that's 2 to 3 weeks down the line that you haven't seen. Like, you have to, it can be a little bit lagging in that way. So that is one downside to it. But again, even tracking calories, all your calories and macros, which I still have clients do, that still comes with its potential errors and everything like that too, especially if people aren't accurate there. So again, I'm looking at first their rate of loss. Okay. And a good rate of loss is what's going to be aggressive. I think that's going to be also sustainable for people is going to be around 1% of body weight loss per week. Now, again, the more aggressive you go, the shorter that diet needs to be, as I just talked about in that last question there. To me, that's going to be the rate of loss that we're looking at. And again, I think that's going to get you around 500 calories off of your maintenance. And if it doesn't, then and you're falling short of that 1% of body weight loss per week, you're at 0.8%, then maybe you decrease your calories just a bit more. Maybe that puts you at, now you're, that you're at 1% body weight loss per week, and maybe you're eating 1,700 calories, right? That's perfect. Now you're able to eat a little bit more, but you're seeing that rate of loss, and it's aggressive at that point, right? Because anytime we go higher than, say, 1% of body weight loss per week, you're going to risk lean body mass loss. Now, if you're eating protein, you're training to build muscle, your output is in a good spot, I think you should be good to not lose muscle, unless you're like super lean. Then if you're super lean on top of it and you have a lot of muscle, then you're at a higher risk. But if you're at higher body fat levels, you have less muscle, the chances of you losing muscle are slim to none in that process. But again, your training is important. And he specifically said his wife likes to do boot camp style classes. So that's going to throw another wrench in, where now when we diet aggressively and we're trying to have this high output from a training perspective, there's going to be some adaptation going on as well too there. So that's going to be another thing that we need to potentially look at with that. So again, we want to look at your rate of loss. Like, that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to tell me if you're actually in a deficit, regardless of what your freaking calories say. Again, you could be tracking 1,500 calories, but if you're tracking 1,500 calories and we're not dropping any weight in terms of your average weight not trending down over multiple weeks, I could sit here and say eat 1,500 calories. That's aggressive for you, but that's not happening, right? So we need to look into what's actually going on. Do we need to actually drop calories, or is it, hey, you're under reporting calories? And again, when we're in a fat loss diet, there's things going on in the brain that are going to push us towards wanting more calories and to consume more, to spend less calories and to eat more calories. So your body's just naturally going to push you that way if you're not consistently on top of it there. But also, like, no matter what we decide from an aggressive rate of loss, we need to look at biofeedback, like menstrual cycle, energy levels, training, digestion. Where's that at? Because if that's not good, but we're getting an aggressive diet going on, so then that's probably a bit too aggressive, and we need to look into that, because that's not going to be good. At some point, there's going to be some downstream impacts of that. Maybe in the short term, not a big deal, but long term, you're going to start to run into some issues, and it's just going to be hard to stick to what you're doing. Again, current body fat levels are going to be important. The leaner someone is, especially women in particular, the more we need to watch these things. We need to be careful with super aggressive diets. Again, recent dieting history is also going to be important. How long do you want them to be? Because again, the more aggressive we are, it's going to be shorter. You have to look into that. And then training and output. On top of it, if you're going to be super aggressive, like, we need to be careful with super high training output during that time, because again, that's just going to dig you into a deeper recovery hole. And on top of it, you're going to So it's going to dig you into a deeper recovery hole. You're also now working super hard in your training. You're not actually able to display as much performance because you're fatigued. You have a lot of stress on the body. And so now you're like working super hard. Now your body's super stressed. And now it's going to start to fight a little bit in terms of wanting to change its body composition. So we need to also pay attention to that there. So those are some things I would consider in terms of how aggressive to go with women. And to make this even more, not necessarily complicated, but to throw another wrench into this is women tend to have a higher stress response to deficits and lower body. So like energy deficits and obviously with lower body fat levels, right? So the leaner someone is, the larger the deficit is. Women tend to have a larger stress response. And so what that means is, again, you're going to run into this issue where now they start retaining water. They get to that kind of breaking point, whatever that breaking point is for them, whether it's from a mood perspective, whether it's going off plan and saying, screw it, that you get to that breaking point a bit sooner. And then again, you run into issues from a hormonal perspective. Things like thyroid will start to decrease a bit more. Again, from a menstrual cycle perspective, that will start to get impacted. Digestion gets impacted. Libido gets impacted. Women are just a bit more sensitive to that at any given body fat level and to any sort of deficit, right? So my thing is, we can be aggressive with women in terms of fat loss, but we have to be smart with it. We have to, if we're going to go aggressive, we have to make sure that we really watch our recovery. We have to make sure that we probably have some refeed days built in. Can't do it for as long a period of time. Like I said, the nutrition needs to be on point. We need to make sure micronutrients are like we're really crushing that. You just have to watch these things a bit more for women, the more aggressive you are with fat loss. And then you add in the body fat thing, and that makes it even more important to watch. And then to go off this one more time, or to go a little bit deeper into this, sometimes too low of calories is hard to sustain. You give someone a super aggressive number of, say, you need to hit 1,500 calories, but for them, that's, oh my gosh, that's so freaking low. It's so hard for me to stick to this. And then so they subconsciously go off plan because it's super low. They can't fit in any sort of food. They feel like they don't have any calories to work with. And then you overeat because you're in this state of, it's from a mental perspective, you want to eat, but then also physiologically, you want to eat. And so this is why sometimes you give someone a little bit higher calories to work with, and it can be better from a mental perspective, and they can actually stick to the deficit. So they actually get into a deficit because they have a little bit more flexibility from a mental perspective. And they actually can stick to a deficit, even though it's quote unquote less aggressive in terms of how many calories you have. We need to look into that as well too. So hopefully that answers your question there on how aggressive do we need to be? And lastly, I think we can expect a bit more weight fluctuation in this process for women. So we have to make sure that we're tracking the right things here, and we can't get caught up in, oh, hey, they have one day where their weight is not budging. It maybe went up from one day to the next from a water retention standpoint. Oh, I need to slash calories more. I need to work out even harder. I need to do another boot camp style day. And again, you're going to dig yourself into a deeper and deeper hole, and you're just going to run into issues there. We also need to understand that there's going to be some water weight fluctuations as well too, that again comes from that kind of higher stress response there. All right. So another question I got was barbell, dumbbell RDL, which is better? People ask us about certain exercises, and it's basically the same exercise. It's just a different way to do it. And I don't think one's going to be better than the other. I think I think for most exercises, we could have a potential rationale as to why we have that exercise in a program. Okay. And that's the first thing, is one isn't necessarily better than the other, just as a blanket statement. I think some differences between a barbell and dumbbell RDL is you're going to be able to load up one a bit more. So for people that aren't necessarily like super strong, like maybe you're newer to training, a dumbbell RDL could be super solid for you, right? To one, learn the movement, but then also to be able to like, you don't have to load as much in order to get there. Whereas someone that gets super strong on an RDL, you're going to get to the point where you need to do 100+ pound dumbbells. And again, that can be hard to get for some people. If you have access to them, again, you could utilize that, but we just have to understand that like from a loading perspective, you're going to be able to load up the barbell RDL as you get to higher and higher levels there. We're also looking at, it's just a way to add some variety into your training. So if you've been doing barbell RDLs for extended periods of time, that can get monotonous. And with hypertrophy, as long as we apply the right stimulus, and obviously the movement that we're doing is applying that stimulus to that muscle, we have some flexibility in terms of what we can do. It's just going to be a way to add some variety into, hey, you've been doing a barbell RDL for the last 3 years. Maybe let's take a couple phases to now do the dumbbell RDL for a bit. Now we obviously have to look at the loading side of things, as I talked about. But again, it's a way to add variety, especially for people that aren't necessarily super, super strong. We have that runway to be able to get super heavy with the dumbbells. Preference, maybe you like the way one feels a bit better for you. You really can put more tension on your muscles in the dumbbell RDL versus the barbell. But maybe the barbell, you do. Right. But then also from a preference standpoint, maybe the barbell RDL feels better than the dumbbell RDL. These are things that I'm considering. And then I think it's a good idea to just periodize exercises from time to time. It comes back to the variety side of things. But again, things get stale. And I just think having some flexibility or some variety and periodizing different movements from time to time is a good idea. Now, again, we can take this too far and move and change movements all of the time, which I don't think is great either. But if we just do it every once in a while, but on the flip side, I think that if you stick with something for extended periods of time, again, you can run into issues where now it's stale. You're not really pushing yourself as hard. Maybe you have some little injuries from that exercise, or it's just not feeling as good as it did. We can use periodizing your exercises to get a better change that stimulus a little bit there. So, those would be my rationales between a dumbbell and barbell RDL. I don't think one is better than the other. It's just, hey, how does this fit into your program? What have you done recently? What do you like? Can you load that one up? What do we have access to there? All right. And then my final question of the day was, how come you're going back to 4 days of lifting? At least for this training cycle, I want to go back to, I'm going to a full body and then upper pull, upper push, and then I'm going to do legs, and then I'm going to add in a couple cardio days. I'm going to be a bit more flexible with the cardio side of things. I love cardio. I want to keep improving that. Building muscle is still my bread and butter. And I just want to, I still want to I want to look like I lift weights and want to continue to push building muscle as much as I can within given my constraints there. And I feel like I've gotten a little bit away from that recently, and that's fine. That was the goal of it. But now it's, hey, I spent that period of time really ramping up my cardio. Now I feel like I have this ability to maybe push hypertrophy now for a little bit focusing on that a little bit more during this phase where I'm eating more calories. Again, I'm still going to do cardio and I'm still going to push it and whatnot, but building muscle is still what I love. And I always come back to, man, I like the 3 days of training, but I just want to do a bit more. I feel like, and especially from an upper body perspective, I feel like I can do a little bit more. And so I'm going to lean into that, especially understanding that, hey, it's been probably a year or so since I haven't done more than 3 days from a weight training perspective. But also it's a goal to just shorten the workouts. I felt like the 3 days was just getting a bit long in my sessions. They were all an hour plus, and man, that can just be a grind. And then every day you got to do some sort of leg. You got to do. I just felt like the workouts were just getting long, and I was just dreading them towards the end. And I always felt like I was rushing at the end to get them done. And it's also a way to just help me get a little bit shorter workouts in potentially there. And then also, I just think it's good to, if you have a goal here of, hey, I want to build up something else besides just maybe building muscle, which you can just always build up muscle and you don't need to periodize. You could always have 4 or 5 day splits. But if you do have a goal of, hey, I would like to improve this fitness skill, it's probably not a bad idea to have some sort of periodization where you have a phase where you go a little bit harder on one thing. The other thing maybe gets put on, not on the back burner, but maybe closer to maintenance. So you do a little bit less of it. And so that's what I'm doing here, right? Where I've been doing cardio 3-4 times a week, weight training 3. And it's like, all right, that's good. That helped. I know it helped build up my cardiovascular fitness. And now it's going to take less to maintain what I currently have from a cardiovascular fitness standpoint. So now that frees up time to where I can do a bit more muscle building work now at this point. And again, being in better cardiovascular shape, I feel like my muscles are going to be in a spot to where maybe there's a little bit room for more growth, put in more high quality volume and everything like that. Because I do feel like the better your cardiovascular fitness is, to me, that's going to have some positive benefit on muscle building as well too, right? Yeah. And then I just feel like now too, I'm just more efficient with cardio, more effective. And I know I don't need a ton of time for cardio, right? That was a big thing initially. It's, oh, you need to do 3 zone 2 sessions a week at 45 plus minutes at each time. It's like, dude, that's a freaking grind and it's hard to put all that in. So then I did feel like I needed to do all these cardio days. And then it's like, how am I going to fit my weight training in now at this point? And so now I feel like I don't need those long, super long periods of time, especially the less you do overall. And I'm just feel like I can be a bit more efficient and more flexible with my cardio, especially now too that I've also built it up a bit more. Again, I think if you want to build something up, you do really need to take time to get it done. And you're going to put in a little bit more time, but eventually you can back off and you have a little bit more flexibility. And also this was something I picked up from Alex Viata when I had him on the podcast, is when you do something like you're trying to push maybe your cardio as well as your weight training, is you become a bit more effective and efficient at each one. And that means you can get better quality work done in less time. And so I feel like that's where I'm at with this. That's where I feel like I can get a little bit more effective and efficient time in from a cardiovascular fitness standpoint and still progress maybe a bit slower than it would be if I was doing more and less weight training, but I can still progress at least a little bit. And that was kind of my thought with the building muscle is, yeah, I was doing 3 days less volume. I probably wasn't growing as much as I would be if I was doing 4 or 5 days more volume, but I felt like I was still doing enough because I was really focused on recovery, nutrition. And again, I know I feel better about what I need to do in my muscle building sessions to build muscle. So I was able to get away with a little bit less and still grow, even if the growth was this compared to this, right? I think that's a lot of times when people ask what they need to do from a building muscle perspective, cardio perspective, fat loss perspective, they think it's either you're maxing out your gains at it all, and if you're not doing all those things, you're not getting anything. Man, there's everything literally in between here, and we forget about that and take away that. So hopefully that gives you some insight into why I'm going back to 4 days. So maybe I'll go back to 3 here in a couple months. I'm just going to see how things go on. I think that's the other big thing for me too, is I'm just used to be very like, hey, I need to have it this structured out to where it's this and this. Now I just want to be a bit more flexible with things, and I'm trying to really incorporate more flexibility versus feeling like I need to be super rigid with everything in terms of daily workouts, when I do them, on what days, what phase I'm in of nutrition. What I just want to add a little bit more flexibility into it there. And again, something that I want to continue to work on there. That's it for now. I hope this episode was helpful. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find this podcast. And then lastly, if you have any questions on this episode or any questions in general, or you just want to continue to see more content from me, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. And that's where I'm most active. And again, if you follow me, I'll probably say hi. So just expect that there. So that's it for now. I'll talk to you guys soon.